Have you ever wondered what is actually happening beneath the soil in your garden? When you look at a freshly tilled garden bed in early spring, are you completely sure that this is the best thing for your soil? Most of us believe that loose soil means healthy soil. We see freshly turned earth, and it feels like progress. But is that belief really correct? Or could it be possible that we are unknowingly disturbing a living ecosystem that has been quietly working beneath our feet? Consider this for a moment. Soil scientists have discovered that a single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain billions of bacteria, along with thousands of microscopic organisms. Beneath what appears to be ordinary garden dirt exists a vast underground community of life. Tiny fungal threads spread through the soil and connect the roots of plants together. These networks are known as mycorrhizal networks. They help plants share nutrients and improve their ability to absorb essential minerals from the soil. Now, imagine what happens when a rototiller moves through that soil. In just a few minutes, the spinning blades can tear through those delicate networks. The tunnels created by earthworms collapse. Microbial communities are disrupted. What once looked like healthy soil may actually be an ecosystem that has just been reset. This realization raises an important question. When we till our gardens, every spring, are we preparing the soil, or are we unintentionally damaging the living system that supports our plants? And if that is true, why do some traditional farming communities avoid tilling their soil almost entirely? These questions began forming in my mind one quiet evening in the countryside of Pennsylvania. The sun was slowly sinking behind wide-open fields. A warm golden light stretched across the land and illuminated rows of garden beds. The air carried the familiar scent of freshly turned soil, a smell that many gardeners associate with the start of a new growing season. Across a small country road, my neighbor was working in his garden. The steady sound of his rototiller echoed through the evening air. As the machine moved across the beds, the soil was lifted and churned into soft, loose rows. Within a few hours, the garden looked completely transformed. The soil appeared clean and perfectly prepared for planting. At first glance, it looked exactly like the ideal garden you might see in a gardening magazine. But not far away, an Amish farmer walked quietly past that garden. He was not pushing a machine. He was not turning his soil. His garden looked very different from the one my neighbor had just finished preparing. Instead of bare soil, the ground was covered with a thick layer of straw. There were no freshly turned rows of dirt. There was no engine noise. The garden looked calm and undisturbed, with plants growing steadily beneath a blanket of organic material. That moment caught my attention. For more than 20 years, I had prepared my garden the same way most people do. Every spring began with the same routine. Start the rototiller, turn the soil, prepare the beds. My father gardened that way. My grandfather did the same. When spring arrived, turning the soil felt like the natural first step of the season, and to be honest, it always felt satisfying. The garden looked neat and organized. The soil appeared soft and ready for planting. But after observing how some Amish families care for their soil, I began to realize that I might have overlooked something important. To them, soil is not simply a place to grow plants. It is a living system that must be protected and nurtured. Many Amish communities follow a simple principle of stewardship. They believe the land is something you care for so that it can remain healthy for the next generation. That philosophy leads to a very different approach to gardening. Instead of constantly disturbing the soil, they focus on working with the natural processes already happening beneath the surface. And that idea led me to one simple question that changed the way I think about gardening. If soil is truly alive, what happens when we tear it apart every spring? That question made me start looking at my garden in a completely different way. For most of my life, I had thought of soil as simply the place where plants grow. If the soil was loose and easy to dig, then the garden must be healthy. But when I began learning more about soil science, I discovered that soil is far more than just dirt. It is a living ecosystem that is constantly active beneath the surface. Under every garden bed, there is an entire world of life: bacteria, fungi, Earthworms and countless microscopic organisms are working together every single day. Soil researchers often point out that a single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain billions of bacteria. Along with those bacteria are tiny fungal threads that stretch through the soil like invisible highways connecting plant roots. These fungal networks are known as mycorrhizal networks. They play a remarkable role in helping plants grow. Through these networks, fungi attach themselves to plant roots and extend far into the surrounding soil. This greatly increases the plant's ability to absorb nutrients such as phosphorus and other essential minerals. Some studies suggest that plants connected to strong mycorrhizal networks can absorb nutrients much more efficiently than plants growing in disturbed soil. Earthworms are another important part of this underground system. As earthworms move through the soil, they create small tunnels that allow water and air to move deeper into the ground. These tunnels prevent water from pooling on the surface and help plant roots reach deeper layers of soil. When earthworms consume organic material, they produce nutrient-rich castings that plants can easily use. Together, these organisms build what scientists call soil structure. Healthy soil structure allows the ground to hold water and air at the same time. That balance is what makes fertile soil feel soft and crumbly instead of hard and compacted. However, when a rototiller passes through the garden, many of these systems are suddenly disrupted. The fast-spinning blades cut through delicate fungal networks. The tunnels created by earthworms collapse. Microbial communities that had been working together become scattered and disturbed. From the surface, the garden may still look perfect. Freshly tilled soil appears soft and clean, but underneath that surface, the biological community has just experienced a major disruption. Agricultural researchers have also observed another long-term effect. Frequent tilling can gradually reduce the amount of organic matter in the soil. Organic matter is essential because it feeds soil organisms and helps the ground retain moisture. When organic matter declines, soil often becomes harder and dries out more quickly. This may explain why tilled gardens often require tilling again or every year. The natural structure of the soil weakens over time, so mechanical disturbance becomes necessary just to restore the looseness that healthy soil once created naturally. Now compare that with what happens in a natural forest. No one tills the forest floor. Leaves fall to the ground and slowly decompose. Microorganisms break down that organic material. Earthworms pull pieces of organic matter deeper into the soil. Over time, the soil becomes rich, stable, and full of life. This is something Amish farming communities have quietly observed for generations. They understand that soil does not need to be constantly disturbed to remain productive. Instead, soil improves when the living systems beneath it are protected and supported. That realization leads to an important question. If turning the soil disrupts the natural ecosystem beneath it, is there a better way to prepare a garden without tearing the soil apart? The answer I eventually discovered did not involve complicated machines or expensive technology. It came from simple methods that many Amish families have practiced in their gardens for decades. And the first of those methods begins with something surprisingly simple. Instead of leaving soil bare, they cover it with a thick layer of organic material that protects the soil and feeds the life beneath it. As I continued observing how Amish gardeners cared for their soil, the first thing that caught my attention was not a special machine or a complicated technique. What stood out was something much simpler. They almost never left their soil bare. Nearly every garden bed was covered with a thick layer of organic material resting gently on the surface. At first, I assumed this was simply a way to make the garden look tidy. But the more I watched, the more I realized that this layer was actually one of the most important parts of their entire system for building healthy soil. This method is often called deep mulching. Instead of turning the soil to loosen the surface, gardeners place a layer of natural materials directly on top of the ground. These materials protect the soil while slowly feeding the living ecosystem beneath it. The materials themselves are simple and easy to find. Straw is one of the most common choices in many Amish gardens. Dried leaves are another option, especially in areas where trees are abundant. Some gardeners also use aged wood chips that have begun to break down naturally. The layer is usually spread across the garden beds with a thickness of about 4 to 6 inches. That thickness is important because it blocks sunlight from reaching the soil surface. When sunlight cannot reach the soil, many weed seeds struggle to germinate. Agricultural studies have shown that a thick layer of mulch can significantly reduce weed growth in garden beds. For gardeners, this means spending far less time pulling weeds during the growing season. Another important benefit of mulch is moisture retention. When the soil surface is covered, water evaporates much more slowly. On hot summer days, the soil beneath the mulch remains cooler and retains the moisture that plant roots need. For many gardeners, this simple change can reduce how often the garden needs to be watered. But perhaps the most powerful benefit of deep mulching happens gradually over time. As the straw or leaves rest on the surface, they begin to decompose slowly. Microorganisms in the soil feed on this organic material. As they break it down, nutrients are released into the soil in a slow and steady way. Earthworms are especially attracted to these layers of organic matter. They pull small pieces of the material down into their tunnels. As they digest it, they produce nutrient-rich castings that improve soil fertility. The tunnels created by earthworms also improve soil aeration. Water can move deeper into the soil, and plant roots can grow through the loosened pathways. When I first tried this method in my own garden, the results surprised me. During the first season, a few weeds still pushed their way through the mulch, but the number of weeds was dramatically lower than what I had experienced before. Instead of spending hours each week removing weeds, I only needed a few minutes to pull the occasional plant that managed to break through. By the second growing season, the soil beneath the mulch had begun to change. When I lifted the layer of straw and scooped up a handful of soil, I noticed that the color had become darker. The soil had a rich, earthy smell that gardeners often associate with fertile ground. Even more interesting was the structure of the soil itself. It felt loose and crumbly without needing to be tilled. Soil scientists often describe healthy soil with a simple test. If you squeeze a handful of healthy soil, it should form a loose ball. But when you poke it gently, it should crumble apart into small pieces. This structure allows soil to hold moisture while still allowing air to circulate around plant roots. In many ways, mulch acts like a protective blanket for the soil. It moderates temperature, protects microbial life, and creates an environment where soil organisms can continue their work without constant disturbance. However, even with deep mulching, another issue sometimes appears in gardens that have been tilled for many years. The upper layer of soil may improve, but deeper layers can remain compacted from years of mechanical disturbance. When soil becomes compacted, plant roots struggle to grow downward, and water cannot move easily through the ground. That is where a simple but powerful tool, often used in Amish gardens, comes into the picture. This tool is called a broadfork, and the way it works is completely different from a rototiller. The first time I saw a broadfork in an Amish garden, it looked surprisingly simple. At a glance, it resembled a large metal fork with 2 long wooden handles. The bottom of the tool had several long steel tines that could be pushed into the soil, and above them was a horizontal bar where the gardener could place a foot for leverage. There was no engine, no fuel, and no loud machinery involved. Yet this simple design is exactly what makes the broadfork so effective in a no-till gardening system. Using the tool is straightforward. The gardener places the steel tines into the soil and steps onto the crossbar to push them deep into the ground. Once the tines are fully inserted, the gardener gently pulls the handles backward. This motion lifts and loosens the soil without turning it over. That difference may seem small, but it is extremely important. When a rototiller is used, the upper layers of soil are mixed together with deeper layers. Organisms that live in different parts of the soil are suddenly displaced from their natural environment. The delicate balance of the soil ecosystem is disrupted. A broadfork works differently. It loosens the soil without flipping it. The top layer of soil remains where it belongs. This upper layer is where most biological activity takes place. Microorganisms, fungi, and organic matter are concentrated here. When this layer stays undisturbed, the soil ecosystem can continue functioning normally. Soil scientists often emphasize the importance of soil structure. Healthy soil is made up of small aggregates that form naturally as organic matter, and microbial activity bind soil particles together. These aggregates create tiny spaces within the soil. Those spaces allow water to move through the soil while still holding enough moisture for plant roots. The broadfork helps create pathways in the soil without destroying those natural aggregates. Something interesting often happens after soil is loosened with a broadfork. Within a few weeks, earthworms begin to move into the newly opened spaces. They expand the channels and continue improving the soil structure naturally. Over time, the soil becomes easier to work with, even without mechanical tools. In my own garden, the results became visible within a single growing season. Before using a broadfork, heavy rain would sometimes leave small puddles on the soil surface. Water had difficulty penetrating the compacted ground. After loosening the beds with the broadfork, rainwater began soaking into the soil much more quickly. This simple change also helped plant roots grow deeper into the soil. Deeper roots allow plants to access water and nutrients stored below the surface. As a result, the plants became more resilient during hot or dry periods. But improving soil structure is only one part of building healthy soil. Amish gardeners understand that soil must also be fed continuously so that the living ecosystem beneath the surface can keep functioning. Instead of mixing compost into the soil with a tiller, they use a different approach. They place compost directly on top of the soil and allow natural processes to distribute the nutrients. This method is often called compost top dressing. At the beginning of the growing season, or in late autumn, a thin layer of finished compost is spread across the surface of the garden beds. The compost is not dug into the soil. It simply rests on top of the ground. For many gardeners, this approach feels unusual. We are often taught that soil amendments must be mixed into the soil in order to reach plant roots. But when we observe natural ecosystems, we see that nature works differently. In forests, no one tills the ground to mix fallen leaves into the soil. Leaves settle on the surface and slowly break down over time. Earthworms pull organic particles into their tunnels. Microorganisms and fungi gradually incorporate the nutrients into the soil. The same process happens in the garden when compost is placed on the surface. Rainwater carries dissolved nutrients downward into the soil profile. Earthworms pull organic particles deeper into the ground. Fungal networks transport nutrients directly to plant roots through their underground connections. Over time, this process builds richer soil while preserving its natural structure. When deep mulching, broadforking, and compost top dressing are combined, the soil begins to improve year after year. But there is still another important piece of this system that many gardeners overlook. It involves protecting and feeding the soil during the months when the main crops are no longer growing. When autumn arrives and the main crops in the garden have been harvested, many gardeners feel that their work for the year is finished. The beds are cleared, the tools are put away, and the garden is left alone until spring returns. For months, the soil often sits bare and exposed during the cold winter season. For many years, I followed the same routine. Once the harvest was complete, I simply left the soil uncovered and waited until spring to begin the process of tilling and planting again. But after learning more about how Amish communities care for their soil, I realized that they almost never leave their garden beds bare for long periods of time. To them, bare soil is vulnerable soil. When soil is left uncovered, heavy rain can wash away the top layer of fertile earth. Wind can dry the surface more quickly. And when sunlight reaches bare soil without any plants to compete for space, weeds quickly move in to fill the empty ground. Instead of leaving soil exposed, many Amish gardeners plant something else in the garden at the end of the growing season. These plants are not grown for food. They serve a completely different purpose. Their role is to protect and nourish the soil throughout the winter months. These plants are known as cover crops. Cover crops act like a living shield for the garden. They spread across the soil surface and protect it from erosion caused by wind and rain. Their roots hold the soil in place and help maintain moisture in the ground. But their benefits go far beyond simple protection. Some cover crops actively improve soil fertility. Legume plants such as crimson clover or hairy vetch form partnerships with specialized bacteria that live in their roots. These bacteria capture nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form that plants can use. This process is called nitrogen fixation. That means the soil is quietly gaining nutrients during the months when the garden would otherwise be resting. When spring arrives and the cover crop is cut down, the plant material becomes organic matter that feeds the soil. Other cover crops serve different purposes. One interesting example is the daikon radish, sometimes called tillage radish. This plant develops a thick taproot that can grow deep into the soil. As the root pushes downward, it creates channels that break through compacted layers beneath the surface. When winter temperatures eventually kill the plant, the decomposing root leaves behind a natural pathway. These pathways allow water and plant roots to travel deeper into the soil during the next growing season. Another widely used cover crop is winter rye. This plant grows quickly and forms a dense root system that helps stabilize the soil. During heavy rains, the roots help prevent erosion by holding soil particles in place. As spring approaches, cover crops are typically cut down and left on the surface of the garden beds. This technique is often called chop and drop. Instead of removing the plant material, gardeners leave it where it falls. The stems and leaves form a natural mulch layer that protects the soil and feeds microorganisms. In this way, cover crops become part of the same system as deep mulching. When you step back and look at the entire approach, the different methods begin to connect with one another. Organic mulch protects the soil surface and feeds microbial life. The broadfork loosens compacted soil without destroying its structure. Compost placed on the surface provides a steady supply of nutrients. Cover crops continue protecting and feeding the soil during the colder months. Each method supports the others. After using these practices for a while, the changes in the soil become noticeable. The ground holds moisture more effectively. Weed pressure gradually decreases, and the soil becomes easier to work with by hand. But many gardeners still wonder about one important question. What if you are starting with hard ground or an old patch of grass? How do you turn that area into a productive garden without tilling the soil? Fortunately, there is a simple technique that many Amish families have used when expanding their gardens. When people first begin learning about no-till gardening, one of the most common questions usually sounds like this. If the starting point is a patch of grass or a piece of hard compacted ground, how can that area be turned into a productive garden without using a tiller? The answer I learned from observing many Amish gardens was surprisingly simple. It does not require machines or complicated tools. The method is often called sheet mulching. Some gardeners also refer to it as lasagna gardening because the materials are layered on top of each other, much like the layers in a lasagna dish. The idea behind this method is straightforward. Instead of digging up grass or weeds, you cover them with natural materials and allow the process of decomposition to do the work for you. The first step is preparing the area. If the space is covered with grass or weeds, simply cut the vegetation as low as possible. There is no need to remove the roots or dig up the soil. Cutting the plants short allows the layers placed on top to block sunlight more effectively. The next step is to place a layer of plain cardboard across the entire surface of the ground. The pieces of cardboard should overlap slightly so that no light can reach the soil below. Without sunlight, the grass and weeds underneath gradually weaken. After placing the cardboard, it helps to wet it thoroughly with water. Moisture softens the cardboard and begins the process of decomposition. Once the cardboard is in place, a layer of finished compost can be spread across the top. This layer provides nutrients and encourages soil microorganisms to begin working in the new garden bed. On top of the compost, another layer of organic material can be added. Straw-dried leaves or aged wood chips all work well for this step. From this point forward, nature begins to take over the process. Over the following weeks and months, earthworms and microorganisms move into the layered materials. They gradually pull organic particles downward and mix them into the soil beneath. The cardboard slowly softens and breaks down over time. Meanwhile, the compost and mulch above continue feeding the developing soil ecosystem. After several months, the area begins to change. The soil becomes softer and richer. If this system is started in the autumn, the bed is often ready for planting by the following spring. When planting time arrives, you simply move aside a small portion of the mulch, cut a small opening through the softened cardboard, and place your transplant into the soil below. Plant roots grow downward into soil that is being naturally improved by earthworms and microorganisms. When I tried this method to create 2 new beds in my own garden, the results were remarkable. After a few seasons, those beds became some of the most productive areas in the entire garden. The soil was darker, softer, and full of earthworms. One of the most important lessons I learned from this approach is patience. Soil ecosystems take time to rebuild. During the first season, the changes may be subtle, but after a full growing cycle, many gardeners begin to notice improvements such as better water retention and fewer weeds. After 2 or 3 years, the soil often becomes easier to work with than it ever was when it was regularly tilled. Perhaps the most meaningful idea behind the Amish approach to soil is the concept of stewardship. The goal is not to control nature completely. Instead, it is to understand how natural systems work and to support those processes. Soil is not something that exists for a single season. It is the foundation that supports gardens for many years to come. When soil is cared for properly, it continues to improve over time. If these ideas have made you think differently about preparing your garden soil, you might consider trying one of these simple methods during your next growing season. Every garden is unique, but when we begin working with nature instead of against it, the results can be surprisingly powerful.